Let us step into a world where the last act of a great American tragedy was, by the narrowest of margins, left unperformed. The year is 1865, the evening of April 14th, and the air in Washington city is thick with the damp, hopeful chill of a spring that has finally seen the end of a long winter of war. President Abraham Lincoln, weary to his bones but with a lightness in his heart he has not felt in 4 years, prepares to attend a comedy at Ford's Theater. In our world, the story is a familiar, mournful dirge. But here, in this quiet corner of possibility, the threads of fate are woven just a fraction differently. A guard is more alert. A door is locked. A conspirator's nerve fails. John Wilkes Booth never makes it to the president's box. The pistol shot that shattered a nation's fragile peace never rings out. Instead, the laughter inside the theater is genuine, echoing into the gaslit streets. And when the final curtain falls, the president returns to the White House, to a late supper and a pile of correspondence concerning the monumental task ahead. The work of Reconstruction is no longer a legacy to be inherited, it is a burden he must now shoulder himself. This is the quiet pivot upon which a new world turns, not with a bang, but with the soft rustle of papers on a desk and the determined steady breath of a man who has been granted a second chance. The weeks that follow unfold not in a frantic scramble but with a deliberate, almost methodical pace. Lincoln's physical presence becomes the central fact of Washington's political life. He is seen daily moving between the White House and the War Department, his tall frame a little more stooped, his famous beard now shot through with more silver than black.
He meets not only with generals and radical Republicans, but with a steady stream of visitors from the defeated South, plantation owners with desperation in their eyes, and increasingly, with delegations of freedmen, their posture newly straight, their words carefully chosen. He listens. He takes notes in his sprawling hand. The famous clemency he showed during the war now extends into this uneasy peace, but it is a clemency tempered by an unshakable principle, repeated in private meetings and public letters alike. The Union must be restored, and the freedmen's liberty must be made a fact, not just a proclamation. By the summer of 1865, the outlines of what historians would later call Lincoln's plan begin to emerge. It is more flexible than the radical Republicans' wish, yet far more assertive than the defeated Confederates' fear. Using the war powers he has not yet relinquished, he issues a series of executive orders. They establish federal freedmen's bureaus not just for relief, but for education and land arbitration. Crucially, he ties the readmission of Southern states to their ratification of a new constitutional amendment, not just the 13th, which abolishes slavery, but a robust 14th, guaranteeing citizenship and equal protection under the law. He argues for it not as a punitive measure, but as the only logical foundation for a lasting peace. We cannot have two peoples in one land, he tells a skeptical Congress. We must have one people, under one law. The resistance is fierce, of course. The old plantation aristocracy fumes. Newspapers in New York and Charleston alike decry executive overreach. But something vital is missing from this historical moment, the profound, destabilizing shock of martyrdom.
There is no sacred unifying grief to cloak the radical agendas of Thaddeus Stevens and his allies, nor is there a void of leadership for Andrew Johnson's bitter obstructionism to fill. The political center of gravity holds, anchored by the weary but implacable man in the White House. The 1866 midterm elections become a referendum not on revenge but on Reconstruction, and Lincoln, campaigning not for himself but for his vision, takes his case north to Ohio and Indiana and, astonishingly, south to Nashville and Atlanta. His speeches are not fiery. They are plain, logical, and steeped in a biblical sense of justice and mercy. He speaks of plowshares and pruning hooks. He speaks of binding up wounds, and when he is heckled, he does not shout. He pauses, lets the silence gather, and then asks a simple, disarming question about the heckler's own family, his own hopes for his children. Picture, if you will, a different South taking shape under this patient pressure. It is not a paradise of racial harmony. Such a thing was impossible in the 19th century, but it is a different landscape altogether. Without a martyred Lincoln to vilify as a tyrant, and with the president himself personally intervening to discourage the formation of vigilance committees, the first incarnation of the Ku Klux Klan never coalesces into a widespread terror. Local militias of disgruntled veterans form, yes, and night riders terrorize individuals in dark corners. but they lack the cultural permission, the tacit national approval that came from a presidency openly hostile to black advancement.
Federal troops under Lincoln's orders are deployed not as an army of occupation, but as a guarantor of specific legal processes, the functioning of the freedmen's bureaus, the safety of voter registrars, the enforcement of federal court orders, and so slowly a new reality takes root. In the red clay fields of Georgia and the black soil of Mississippi, a novel sight becomes more common. A former slave and a former overseer standing before a federal magistrate, arguing not over a lashing, but over the fair price for a season's harvest from a parcel of land the freedman now rents, or, in rarer, hopeful cases, owns. The transaction is tense, often unfair, but it is a transaction. It is economic, not purely despotic. In cities like New Orleans and Charleston, colored schools funded by the Bureau and often staffed by Northern missionaries open their doors. The sound that drifts from their windows is not the crack of a whip, but the recitation of multiplication tables and the Declaration of Independence. The literacy rate among freed people begins its slow, arduous climb a full generation earlier than in our timeline. Now let us zoom in from these broad political strokes to a single human story. This is the story of Elijah Vance. In our world, Elijah was born into slavery in South Carolina in 1849. His fate is unrecorded. In this world, he is 16 years old when the war ends. His master, a man broken by the loss of 2 sons at Gettysburg, simply abandons the plantation in the fall of 1865. Elijah and his family do not flee. They stay. They harvest the remaining cotton.
With the guidance of a young, idealistic bureau agent from Vermont named Arthur Lowell, Elijah's father petitions the local circuit court, newly reconstituted under Lincoln's orders, for title to the land under the Homestead Act, arguing their labor constituted improvement. It is a long shot. The court, presided over by a weary but fair-minded unionist judge, deliberates for a week. The decision comes on a crisp November morning. The judge rules that while the Homestead Act does not technically apply, a principle of equitable estoppel does. The Vance family, having worked the land and kept it productive while the legal owner absconded, has a possessory claim. They are granted the deed to 40 acres. Not 40 acres and a mule by military fiat, but 40 acres by the rule of law. It is a fragile piece of paper, but to Elijah it feels heavier than any iron chain he has ever worn. That winter, with Agent Lowell's help, Elijah's father secures a small loan from the newly chartered Freedmen's Savings and Trust Company. They buy seed, they repair the cabin, and in the spring of 1866, Elijah plants his first crop as a free man on land he can call his own. The work is backbreaking, the margins razor thin, but the rhythm of his days is now dictated by the sun and the rain, not the overseer's bell. In the evening, by the light of a tallow candle, he painstakingly sounds out words from a blue-backed speller, his brow furrowed in concentration. Agent Lowell visits once a month, bringing newspapers. Elijah reads about the debates in Congress, about President Lincoln's declining health, about the slow ratification of the 14th Amendment. The politics are distant, abstract, but the deed in the tin box under the floorboard is real. The blisters on his hands are real.
Lincoln's second term, from 1865 to 1869, is consumed entirely by this work. He ages visibly, the lines on his face deepening into canyons, the laughter comes less easily. But he sees his amendment ratified in 1867. He sees the last of the Confederate States, Georgia, dragging its feet, readmitted to the Union under its provisions in 1868. He does not seek a third term. The tree is planted, he says in his farewell address in March of 1869. Let others now tend its growth. My strength is spent. The nation elects Ulysses S. Grant, but Grant assumes office as the steward of an established policy, not the architect of a new one. The precedent of federal enforcement for civil rights is set, not perfectly, but indelibly. The decades turn. Lincoln retires to Springfield, where he writes his memoirs and receives a steady stream of visitors until his death from natural causes in 1875. His funeral train retraces its route from Washington, but the mourning is for a father who lived to see his children grow, not for a prophet cut down in his prime. The legacy is more complex, more human, and perhaps more enduring. In the 1870s and 1880s, the American South is a patchwork. There are counties where the old order reasserts itself with brutal effectiveness, where Jim Crow laws sprout in state legislatures. But there are also pockets of remarkable progress. Freedmen's towns flourish. Black landowners like Elijah Vance, now a man with a family of his own and a small but profitable farm, send their children to normal schools and then to colleges like Howard and Fisk. A black professional class, teachers, lawyers, doctors, newspaper editors, emerges not as a tiny besieged elite, but as a visible and integral part of Southern society in certain regions.
The political map is never solidly solid South. Instead, a fragile but persistent biracial coalition of Republicans and moderate Democrats, often called Lincoln Republicans, holds sway in several states, ensuring that at least some black men retain the vote and even hold local offices. The violence of redemption is not a total, overwhelming wave, but a series of bloody battles and a long, grinding conflict. A conflict where the federal government, though reluctant, still occasionally intervenes with legal injunctions or the dispatch of marshals. By the turn of the 20th century, the differences are woven into the fabric of daily life. A traveler on a train heading from New York to New Orleans would see a subtler segregation. Separate but equal is still the law in many places, but the separation is less absolute, the inequality less grotesque. In the smoking car, a black newspaperman from Chicago